this morning is, as always, being web streamed. For this meeting, we have the full AFIT language regime for interpretation. Item number 3. I would like to warmly welcome the ministers. I would like to warmly welcome the vice ministers. I would like to warmly welcome the secretaries of state. A warm welcome to the European Parliament and to this extraordinary meeting of our Committee on Foreign Affairs. For the first time in this term, and probably also in the history of our committee, we are going to have an exchange of views in this format with the kind participation of several ministers, vice ministers and secretaries of state. This is because the subject of our meeting, the EU enlargement policy, is particularly dear to us, being arguably the topic on which our committee has worked the most in the past 5 years, alongside the sad story of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Moreover, I have no doubt that it will be at the core of our activity also in the next legislative term. Parliament, and our committee in particular, are staunch supporters of the EU's enlargement policy, and we have contributed considerably in the past to its shaping. As we speak, work is ongoing at increased pace towards adopting the regulation on the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans. The trilogue has started, and I hope that an interinstitutional agreement will be reached soon. If we look at the EU enlargement policy in general over the past 20 years, I think we can all agree that too little progress has been made for too long. At the same time, however, we need to recognize that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 triggered a paradigm shift that is giving a much-needed momentum also to the EU policy on enlargement. Just a few days ago, the Commission has recommended to open EU accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina and to put forward proposals for draft negotiating frameworks for Ukraine and Moldova to the Council, following the decision by the European Council in December 23 to adopt negotiations with both countries. In addition, tomorrow we expect the adoption by the Commission of a communication on pre-enlargement reforms and policy reviews. Finally, in parallel, the European Council is set to adopt very important decisions at its meeting on the 21st and 22nd of March, and undoubtedly EU enlargement will be one of the main foreign policy topics in the campaign for the June 2024 European elections. At this crucially important juncture, I therefore think it is very timely for our committee to hear the views of our member states on EU enlargement policy, to understand what are, in your opinion, the most important priorities at EU and member states level, and to discuss how we could prepare best for all the challenges ahead of us. So I would like to once again welcome all the ministers, the vice ministers and the state secretaries. If I saw it correctly, at least 4 of you are former MEPs, former members not only of this European Parliament, but partially also members of this committee. So especially Gabrielius, Landsbergis, Krišjānis, Kariņš, Tanja, Fajon and Karoline Edtstadler, a warm welcome back to the European Parliament, where you spent a considerable amount of your political career. I will now give the floor first to our first speaker, and that is Gabrielius Landsbergis, the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, from which the initiative of this meeting came from in the first place. So, Gabrielius, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, dear David, dear colleagues. It's really good to be back here in the European Parliament in different capacity. And thank you for organizing this debate and then the invitation to myself and the colleagues. Last December, European Council ended on a high note. Every European leader who took part in it, with probably just one exception, came out with the very same united message. This is a historic European Council meeting. The EU decided to open accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova. However, today, 3 months since then, EU accession talks with these 2 countries have not yet been opened. Even more so, it is still not clear when exactly this is going to happen. Earlier, there were talks about intergovernmental conference to be held possibly by March. Now there are attempts to refer to June, but it seems today even June cannot be taken for granted. EU enlargement is once again becoming a moving target and a tool for some of the EU member states or their political actors to solve their outstanding bilateral issues with the candidate countries. I refuse to accept this kind of approach, and I call on other colleague ministers and on distinguished members of Foreign Affairs Committee not to allow that. In situations like we have it today, we must show leadership, also explaining to our societies costs and benefits, as well as costs of missing the historic opportunity. EU enlargement is and has always been an important investment into security, stability and peace. Because if we're not ready to export security ourselves, there are many of those who will not miss a single opportunity to import insecurity into Europe. It was Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine that made many of us finally realize that without embracing Ukraine into Union, Europe will not be whole, free and at peace. This is a very consequential geopolitical move, has opened a window of opportunity for the next enlargement of the EU. Deeper, wider and more capable EU which would remove any remaining grey zones from the European map. I visit Ukraine often. The last time I was there in the end of January, I went to Kiev and then to Kharkiv, meeting local people who face daily shelling by Russia of their apartment buildings, hospitals, schools and critical infrastructure. I also met defenders of Ukraine who defend their homeland and their nation, and also us, Europe. In every meeting, Ukrainians were asking for two things. First, weapons, and second, EU and NATO, which they see as the main security guarantee for Ukraine in the long run. An important addition, which they also see as the main guarantee of Ukraine continuing to transform itself in the country where all of them want to live. I therefore call on the EU institutions to deliver on what was promised and to start EU accession talks with Ukraine and with Moldova as soon as possible, June at the very latest. My second plea is on the content. Enlargement process should be objective and merit-based. We must be objective while pursuing it. Unfortunately, while reading reports from Brussels meetings, I see this is not entirely the case. First issue is that new homework elements are being added on the way. Some old skeletons reappear again and again and being brought to daylight at very last minute. One of those skeletons is the issue of national minorities. The rights of minorities must be ensured. There is no question about it. But let us not lose focus on the wider picture. Hungary's blackmailing of Ukraine using the minorities card is playing into the hands of Moscow, maybe even more so than into the hands of Budapest. Ukraine is showing openness of solving objectively existing issues. Hungarian minority has vocally expressed its plea to move ahead with EU accession talks. Maybe except for a certain marginal group, which seems to be a favorite one in Budapest. But Ukraine is also facing a legacy of Soviet times during which the Ukrainian nation was deprived of many of its rights. It also is facing a challenge of finding right answers to malign interference of Moscow through Russian-speaking Ukrainian population. The unity and identity of Ukraine as a state and nation goes through strengthening of the Ukrainian language. If Ukraine is defeated by Russia, there will be no Ukrainian language, but there will be also no Hungarian language in Ukraine. I therefore call on Budapest not to be short-sighted in its assessment. My final call today to all European leaders and to this House of European democracy, we must make sure that EU enlargement keeps going smoothly, that it stays as merit-based and result-oriented process, and that our promises to the people of Ukraine and Moldova are fulfilled. Make sure there are no artificial delays and that we conclude the process in the shortest possible time frame, hopefully by 2030. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabrielius, and once again, thank you also for the initiative for making this meeting possible. I now give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Latvia, Kariņš.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, colleagues. It's wonderful to sit on the same bench with Gabrielius as we did some years ago in this great house. I'll put it a little differently, but building on the same argumentation. In Europe, the idea of a gray zone is unfortunately no longer feasible. The war in Ukraine has brought into focus that actually there's a choice in Europe. Either you are part or become part of the European Union, or you fall strongly under the influence of Russia, perhaps through invasion and occupation, as they are showing their willingness and capability, or partial capability, I suppose that we could say, in Ukraine. We in Europe are a union of values. We spent a lot of time speaking about it. Some member states run into difficulties because of the values, or maybe not upholding all the values, the fundamental one being the rule of law. And the rule of law is that which protects member states in the European Union from our past history, which is one of imperialism. So with the rule of law, this is what protects those who are smaller from those who are larger and could do something, shall we say, aggressive against them. Now, my country, we are now 20 years since we went through the process of joining the EU. That was a time of peace, a time of extreme optimism in Europe. And the process was not easy, it was difficult. Reforms are always difficult. We have now 2 countries with whom negotiations are to begin, Ukraine and Moldova. And they are already showing not only a willingness, but also enacting reforms. And especially, I think we need to understand the extreme difficulty that the Ukrainian government is facing. Not only are they fighting a war against the Russian aggressor, but they are enacting reforms at the same time. I think it's very difficult for any of us in this room to imagine what that must be like, because at most we have gone through reforms in times of peace. But here's a country going through in times of war. So I think it would be very important that if in June the process were to move clearly forward, and Ukraine and Moldova would get a very clear green light from the European Union to move forward with the accession process. Then in the Western Balkans, we have other countries. We have Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we are very hopeful that their government will enact the necessary reforms in order to also qualify for such a process. And the other countries in the Western Balkans, which are maybe, shall we say, a little behind, but we strongly encourage them. We have Georgia on the horizon, which is now a candidate country, and we would certainly encourage them to move forward as well. And accession is a two-way process. It's a process from us in the European Union extending the hand, and it's a process from the candidate countries doing actually the hard work of reforms. But it's this tandem that we need to encourage and do everything on our part to show that if the reforms happen, the doors are wide open. And I think that this is a signal we need to give in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Krišjānis. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Estonia, Margus Tsahkna.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. I haven't been a member of European Parliament, but you never know what the life will bring. But now I'm doing my job here as Foreign Minister of Estonia. And I'm not going to repeat many words my good friends from Latvia and Lithuania already said, but actually, be honest, without this enlargement process of European Union 20 years ago, and also enlargement process of NATO, it took the same time. Probably I couldn't sit here as a Foreign Minister of independent Estonia, because we see from the past what has happened, and Russia has been aggressive not only during the last 2 years, but since 2008 with Georgia, 2014 Ukraine, and now we have a full-scale war, deportation of children, killing people, violation of all the international law. So, but controversially, somehow Putin has been the best salesman of the enlargement processes in the EU and also in NATO. So what we are facing is actually the world which is more divided after this victorious war from Ukraine part based on our support. And this division is going between values about democracies, rule of law, and tyranny. And we must understand as well that the policy of neutrality and the grey zones are over. I'm really happy as an Estonian that Finland decided to join the NATO, and also the Swedish people made the decision. Why I'm talking here when we are discussing the EU enlargement is that actually what we must do, and we do, is to create the new security architecture for Europe. And there is no place for neutrality. There is no place for gray zones, because gray zone is a green light for Putin's aggression. We have witnessed that, and we are now dealing with one active war in the middle of Europe. So my point is that we have to use this historical opportunity, of course, supporting Ukraine, Moldova, but also move forward with the enlargement process, and it gains only our security, our economical development, and of course, we have to stand for our values. And I have a saying that, and the question whether we are fitting into the freedom. So freedom is not granted. We know it very well as front runners in the eastern flank. So we have to stand for the values. We have to stand for freedom. We have to fight for freedom. And that's the reason why I really do enjoy the process and political will since last year, the end of the year before Christmas. We made a decision of enlargement, not only towards Ukraine and Moldova, but also Western Balkans. Also, my colleague Krišjānis said, nominated Georgia as a candidate state. So this is something bigger what we are dealing here. And that's why I really do hope that the discussions and decisions will come soon. It is crucial that we finally start officially the negotiation process with Ukraine and Moldova, because these countries, they have really worked hard at the same time when Ukraine is at war, doing reform and preparing themselves for the enlargement process. And we know that this enlargement process will be very difficult, and we all support by bureaucratic level and also based on our experiences these countries. But we need to move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and please, ministers, because I know that you have to leave all at 9:30, try and keep it to 3 minutes each. Next is Tanja Fajon, also a former colleague from Slovenia.
Thank you very much, dear David, and it's good to be also back here. I think I served almost 2.5 mandates in this committee. So yeah, it's a bit of nostalgia. And I was dealing a lot with enlargement policy, so I especially welcome today's opportunity that you gathered us together here ahead of the EU Council that will also deliver very important messages, I hope so, as regards the EU enlargement. You might recall that I was very vocal always and advocating Slovenia as a front runner supporting the enlargement to the Western Balkans, since we were from Thessaloniki summit 20 years discussing about the enlargement to the Western Balkans. We've seen many progresses on this path, but also we see that we were losing credibility on both sides, be it with delaying accession talks to North Macedonia, Albania, delaying visa liberalization to Kosovo, and so on. So there were some obstacles and hurdles. Now, since the Russian aggression in Ukraine, we are in a new momentum, I would say, is that we have to seize it. And this is that we wish to see the Europe enlarged, bigger and united by 2030. Also with the Eastern Partnership, one doesn't exclude the other, and its own based on merit process. So reforms are there, countries need to grab the momentum, and I often say it's a geostrategic necessity today to speak about the enlargement. Last year in Bled, we hosted a Bled Strategic Forum with Charles Michel, who mentioned a very crucial date for my understanding, which is 2030. And these are two processes. The EU has to be ready by 2030. Those countries that will be ready as candidate countries shall have the opportunity to seize this momentum. And I think we have to focus to 2030 year. I will say with welcoming the new steps on Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine, especially Ukraine and Moldova, and I hope Georgia will follow as soon as possible, we shall not forget what is happening also in the Western Balkans. That is why I started saying 20 years ago we started a discussion on enlargement to the Balkans. It's not easy to compare, but in both processes, we started sending positive messages after the bloody wars to make reconciliation and to make Europe stronger. And this is important today. I think this week's summit has a big responsibility to deliver On one hand, with Ukraine and Moldova, on the other hand, with opening accession talks with Bosnia and Herzegovina. This country also, after delivering candidate status a year ago and more, no one believed this is possible, but they did a significant progress. And we shall not speak about both together. These are separate issues, but when the countries are ready, let's really do a support. So I would just encourage us all, keep enlargement high on the agenda. We are talking about a strong and united union. It's a geostrategic necessity, and deliver when the countries are doing their job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Tanja. Next is the Danish Foreign Minister, Lars Løkke Rasmussen. 3 minutes.
Thank you, David. Thank you for this opportunity. I apologize for not having been a European Member of Parliament, at least until now, but you never know, you never know, you never know. But I'm pleased that my son is a member of the European Parliament, so at least the family is represented. Well, more seriously, we have in Denmark always been a historic friend of enlargement, and we continue to be so. After a number of years with enlargement fatigue, reality today is different, and very much so due to the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So I fully agree, we fully agree that momentum in the enlargement process needs to be kept to send the right signals to candidate countries, but also to Russia. And then, at the same time, we should not deviate from the merit-based approach and the Copenhagen criteria. We must not lower the bar, but help the candidate countries get over it sooner rather than later. A too hasty process risks putting pressure on our internal coherence. It could also mean that we end up having countries join which simply are not ready, and we should do our utmost to avoid that. So in order to do so, we must use every occasion to sustain momentum where it is earned, more for more. And we have devoted a lot of resources to pre-accession programs prior to the 2004 enlargement, and we should do the same again. There should be clear and honest communication about real progress and rewards. On the road ahead, I will just state that from a Danish perspective, we fully support Ukraine and Moldova's path towards EU membership. The Commission's oral report from last week, given to the ambassadors in Coreper, showed that impressive progress has been made. We very much support the Commission in its assessment that both countries are ready for the next step, which is to open accession negotiations. But there's still, of course, work to be done, and we have a special responsibility to help Ukraine and Moldova in their efforts to live up to the relevant criteria. On Bosnia-Herzegovina, a lot of progress has indeed been achieved in the past year, but also here substantial work remains to be done. Situation in the country is fragile, and the progress achieved in a short span of time needs to be consolidated. I therefore want to express support to the assessment of the Commission while keeping to our merit-based approach. There should be no resting on the laurels. We need to stay clear on the need for Bosnia-Herzegovina to maintain its commitment to the reform process. But just to finalize, all in all, I think the messages from the Commission last week were very encouraging on all three countries, and we stand ready to support their path towards joining the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Rasmussen. Next speaker is the Federal Minister for the UN Constitution at the Federal Chancellery in Austria, Karoline Edtstadler, a former MEP.
Thank you so much, dear Chair, dear Vice Chair, dear colleagues. It's really a pleasure being back in this room. It has been a long time that I was sitting here, but it is still very vivid in my mind. But we have also to be very clear. The world has changed a lot since then. And I would like you to invite back a little, to look back a little in history. If we are looking at the year 2016, the Brexit took place. The referendum was decided pro-Brexit, and it was a big shock for the European Union. And this shock was still in the room when we in the GAC meeting discussed in the year 2020 the mandate for the Conference on the Future of Europe. There was the big concern if there is an open mandate also for treaty changes, that other countries could have the need to have referenda in their countries and also follow the example of Great Britain. And in the meantime, a lot changed again, because since the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine started, and a new dynamic is in the EU enlargement policy. And there is no longer the question if, but rather when further countries will join the European Union. This is a big change. This is a positive change. And now we also have to use the dynamic for the Western Balkan countries, especially for Bosnia and Herzegovina. There were important decisions adopted at the last OICO in December for Ukraine and Moldova and also for Georgia. And there was a clear perspective also for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now we have to use this momentum for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also for the whole region. Bosnia and Herzegovina achieved remarkable results in the recent months. The Commission confirmed the substantial reform progress. And there is a clear recommendation for opening the accession negotiations. Now it's time for us. Now it's time for the leaders to acknowledge the reforms and keep the promises from December last year and to decide on the opening of the accession progress with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Anything else would be inconsistent. We have to strengthen the pro-European forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we have to keep up the motivation to maintaining this not easy reform path in this country. It is an important signal for the whole region. And you know that Austria has always been a supporter of the Western Balkan countries. There should not be two classes of future member states of the European Union. It has to be a process which is clear and where everyone knows what will be the next steps. We will continue our engagement in the region, and I can only tell you I was there in December last year. There was a joint visit of the Austrian and the Italian foreign minister only at the beginning of this month. We had an informal exchange with Prime Minister Borjana Kristo only on the 20th of February, and there was also a letter sent by the Western Balkan friends to the presidency of the Council of the European Union. So we are clear and we are really hopeful that this idea of the gradual integration, which came from Austria into EU policy areas, will also keep up this process for the whole region and especially for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We welcome the growth plan, and this is my last sentence for Western Balkan, but it has to be adopted really quickly also here in the European Parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karoline. Now I give the floor to the Minister for European Affairs from Finland, Mr. Anders Adlercreutz.
Thank you, David. Vice Chairs, dear colleagues. Were it not for Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, Finland and Sweden wouldn't be NATO members, and were it not for the same aggression, we wouldn't be here discussing enlargement today. That war has made us realize what it means to be a country between the EU and Russia, what it means to be under constant harassment, constant pressure. And that's why enlargement is an important geopolitical tool to make Europe more stable and prosperous. Of course, there's a long way to go between discussion and action is probably what's been lacking from the EU side, especially when military aid is concerned. But now we're discussing enlargement. The current geopolitical situation requires that we show a united front. It's an obligation of all EU candidate countries to align fully with EU's foreign and security policy. We thank those partners who are fully aligned. It demonstrates their strategic commitment. Those who have not done so should align as a matter of priority. We are glad that all aspiring members benefit from the current momentum in the enlargement. However, enlargement must remain merit-based, and we expect commitment from our enlargement partners towards the needed reforms. Reforms on democratic institutions, rule of law, anti-corruption, and the principles of sound market economy must continue to be the starting point, and they pave the way to the Union. Of course, rule of law must also be an imperative for current members. Strengthening the strategic competitiveness of the EU now and as EU 30+ is a key objective. This will allow us to reduce dependencies and ensure the growth of the single market going forward. And equally, as Mr. Landsbergis said, enlargement mustn't be held hostage to bilateral issues. Finland stands firmly with Ukraine. We are strongly committed to continue our support to Ukraine for as long as needed. Ukraine has done remarkable work under very difficult circumstances and progressed well with the remaining reforms requested by the Commission and the European Council in December. And the same applies to Moldova, who is in an equally difficult situation. Implementation of the reform agenda must continue. We are convinced that Ukraine and Moldova will be ready to begin the accession negotiations soon, as was decided in the European Council in December. And the IGC should be held no later than June to get things forward. As to the Western Balkans, stability and security in the Western Balkans is not only a regional question, but affects the stability of Europe as a whole. We support the Western Balkan countries on their EU path. We are encouraged that countries in the region, such as Montenegro, for example, are showing the political will to push forward quickly with negotiations. We look forward to taking stock on Bosnia and Herzegovina's EU path in the European Council later this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Adlercreutz. Next is the State Secretary from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary, Mr. Péter Starai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I'd like to express our appreciation for the interest of the Parliament in this very important and topical issue. For Hungary, enlargement policy has been an issue of strategic importance from the very beginning, partly because it's an extension of the zone of stability and security, but also because of the extension of the common market, which is a question of our competitiveness. And also, enlargement excludes other players who want to get involved and fill the vacuum in our backyard. So for us, it's both a geopolitical project, but on the other hand, a merit-based process. We have been supporting the countries of the Western Balkans on this path for 20 years, but then 2 years ago, a geopolitical change took place with the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And because of that, we also supported the candidate status, the granting of the candidate status to Ukraine, Moldova, and also Georgia. Hungary is taking over the presidency in the second half of this year, and we will put great emphasis on the enlargement issues. And we will base our judgment on individual performance. We don't think that countries should be coupled. They should be judged on their achievements on their own. We want to have regular political dialogue with the candidate countries. We want to have involvement in as many meetings as possible during our presidency. And we also think that gradual integration is a good concept if it's not an excuse for prolonging the process. We support the finalization of the growth plan as soon as possible, actually, and no further conditions should be set in this framework. And we hope that the disperse of money could take place already in the second half of this year. Now, on the specific countries for 2024, we would like to open chapters with Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia. We want to close chapters with Montenegro. We want to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we hope that the European Council this week will make the important decision on that. We want to start accession negotiations with Moldova, and we want to grant candidate status to Georgia. Finally, the special case, Ukraine. I don't think it's good to speak about blackmailing or such thing. This is not the way how we approach this. There's no blackmailing. We think that each and every candidate country has to live up to the conditions set by the Commission and by the Member States. And Ukraine still has to go down that road, because nation building cannot go hand in hand with the restriction of minority rights. And this is the baseline for Hungary. This is not a bilateral issue, it's a human rights issue, and it's also a security question. So because of that, we are in constant negotiation with the Ukrainians. We hope that we can come to terms with them. They have made an important move in last December, right before the European Council, but there is still a lot to be done, and that's why we are negotiating with them, and that's why we say that the negotiating framework cannot be accepted before there is delivery on this side. So we hope that there will be progress. We support Ukraine's European perspective, but they have to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starai. Next, from Cyprus, I give the floor to the Deputy Minister for European Affairs, Ms. Marilena Rauna.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, thank you for this opportunity to exchange views on this crucial policy of enlargement. It's a great pleasure for me to be at the European Parliament. Enlargement is one of the most successful EU policies. It is and has always been a catalyst for peace, stability, prosperity, security, and unity. And it is one of our most valuable geopolitical tools. The game-changing geopolitical challenges that we are experiencing have given a new geostrategic meaning to EU enlargement, which remains and needs to remain a top priority for the EU. As a colleague has mentioned, I think it was our Slovenian colleague, it is a geostrategical necessity. Today's discussion is also timely, Mr. Chair, as we near the 20-year anniversary of the 2004 accession, which was a milestone in EU unity and also a milestone for the member states involved, including Cyprus. Cyprus is a strong advocate on the accession process. In this regard, we always stand ready to discuss ways of strengthening the efficiency and credibility of this process. In advancing our discussions, as other colleagues have said, it is important to continue underlining that the enlargement process is a merit-based process with strict and fair conditionality on the basis of which each candidate must be assessed on its own progress and on its own merit. Moreover, as this committee has also repeatedly underlined, alignment with EU CFSP is a strong expression of a partner's strategic choice and place in our community of values. There can be no fast-track option for EU membership. As the Latvian colleague has said, reforms are a painstaking process. There is a reason for that, and it's why this process is transformative for the states involved. Since Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the EU has rightly redirected itself to supporting the Western Balkan countries, an approach that Cyprus supports and encourages. Our Western Balkans partners can and need to move forward towards a prosperous future within the European family, and the EU needs to be able to deliver when our partners deliver. Bosnia and Herzegovina has taken decisive steps to push through important reforms. We also welcome the positive developments in Montenegro. With regards to Ukraine, despite the hardship of war, the country has not lost its focus and has remained committed to its engagement with the EU. We are encouraged by the reported progress made by both Ukraine and Moldova, which we consider as a strong manifestation of the country's commitment to their European path. We also commend the progress achieved so far by Georgia, and we encourage the Georgian government to continue implementing its reform program. Now, with regards to Turkey, we continue to firmly believe that the enlargement framework, despite the challenges we know we have, provides the sole comprehensive framework through which the country can remain anchored to the EU and evolve into a European democracy that respects rule of law and fundamental rights. Just like all other enlargement partners, it is up to Turkey to do what it takes in order to advance towards EU membership, to start meeting the obligations it has assumed towards the EU, including with regards to the Cyprus question and contributing constructively towards a comprehensive settlement. A last point.
May I ask you to conclude?
Yes. I just wanted to say that at this crucial juncture, we should meet the challenges that we are faced in view of the next enlargement, and as others have said, in a parallel track, also proceed with the issue of internal reforms. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece, Ms. Alexandra Papadopoulou.
Thank you so much. EU enlargement policy is a strong anchor for peace, democracy, prosperity, security and stability on our continent. My country has always been at the forefront of the efforts aiming at the European integration of the Western Balkans. As the oldest EU member state in this region, Greece was the first country to raise the issue of the EU membership of the Western Balkans as early as 2003 with the Thessaloniki Agenda, which still remains a milestone on the enlargement process. Times have changed, though, and now we have the double challenge of enlargement in two directions, south and east. Both are crucially important, both entail strong geopolitical components, none can proceed at the expense of the other. I want to reiterate our strong commitment to see this process move forward smoothly in both directions. From our part, we will do our utmost to continue supporting our partners, both from the Western Balkans as well as from our eastern neighbourhood, to make progress in the implementation of their EU integration-related obligations. Demonstrating our continuous commitment to this strategic goal, the Greek Prime Minister hosted last August in Athens an informal meeting with the participation of the heads of state and government of the EU member states of the region, the Western Balkan partners, the presidents of Ukraine and Moldova, as well as the presidents of the European Commission and European Council, so to emphasize the unity of purpose and underline the need to work all together for our commonly shared goals. We argue for the need for all candidate countries to be treated by the same rules. Enlargement is a merit-based process linked to the fundamentals which is strictly defined. It is about values and principles and hard choices about the future. In this context, emphasis should be given to reforms regarding the rule of law, notably the independence of the judiciary, the protection of human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities, as well as the fight against corruption and organized crime. And let's be clear here, reforms are not limited to the adoption of adequate and necessary legislation. More than that, they are about implementation. They are about becoming part of the collective way of thinking and acting in the respective countries. After all, eventual membership to the EU is the biggest transformation process in our collective European history. Furthermore, CFSP alignment remains essential for all candidates aspiring to join the EU. In this context, we place much emphasis on ensuring that all partners fully align with the CFSP decisions and statements, especially when it comes to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of EU member states. And finally, it is our part of the job. We have to stick to our commitments and not allow the so-called enlargement fatigue to settle in and obscure our judgment. Neither the discussions about EU absorption capacity, as important as they might be, should stand in the way in a blanket and unforgiving manner. After all, without enlargement, both South and East, our great European project will not be complete. Thank you.
Fiaristo, thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Elena Shekeletova, the Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister from Bulgaria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear members of the European Parliament, thank you very much for initiating this discussion. Bulgaria fully supports the notion that the EU enlargement is a geostrategic imperative and the EU's strongest instrument for stabilization. We share the objective of strengthening the accession process by making it more predictable, credible, and dynamic based on the own merits principle. In view of the Granada Declaration and the subsequent December 2023 European Council conclusions, we approach seriously the discussion regarding optimizing the decision-making process within the EU. At the same time, it's essential to preserve unanimity in the domains of enlargement, the common foreign and security policy, the multi-annual financial framework, the system of own resources, taxation policy, etc. The consensus implies ownership and yields significant benefits in terms of legitimacy of the decision taken. The candidate countries should adhere to the fundamental values of the EU and align themselves with the EU's policies and positions, including in the area of the common foreign and security policy. Alignment with the sanctions against Russia in response to its war of aggression against Ukraine is a must. Moreover, the activities of malign foreign actors using hybrid interference method to impact and derail EU integration should be countered. post-enlarged EU should remain capable of efficient decision-making. In the reform process, differentiated integration solutions leading up to a multi-speed version of Europe are to be avoided. We need to build upon the integrity, coherence, and institutional balance established by the treaties, avoiding lengthy and potentially divisive discussions on a treaty reform. The EU should guarantee the efficient functioning of its policies following the enlargement, paying special attention to the cohesion and agricultural policies where the enlargement poses major financial challenges. In this context, we are looking forward to the impact assessment to be provided by the European Commission as the means to identify a set of realistic and feasible reform opportunities. Position and concerns of all member states should be taken into account. It's imperative to strike the right balance between the geopolitical arguments and the established conditionalities. At the end of the day, it's about an able, stable, and credible European Union. The EU has invested a lot of efforts over the last years in the Western Balkans specifically. What we now need is from them to reciprocate. They will not be left alone. We need them for sure. And no doubt, Ukraine and Moldova have made an enormous progress and they deserve to start of the accession negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. And finally, I give the floor to Madam Andrea Metelko-Zagorombic, the State Secretary for Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Croatia. Dobrodošli.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the European Parliament and of this committee. It gives me a great pleasure to be here with you today, and I would really like to thank you for offering us this opportunity to reflect on enlargement policy. It is true that enlargement policy has gained new momentum because of the new geopolitical reasons, but as previous colleagues said, this process also needs to be kept as a merit base because it ensures transformative power of the candidate countries, which enables them and prepares them for future membership. We are now really very glad that Ukraine and Moldova and a little bit of Georgia is now, as the trio from Eastern Partnership, has now joined Western Balkan 6 partners who have been in the process for a long period of time, and we really do hope that each and every of those countries will seize the momentum and take the chance. On our side, we need to support them and give them any assistance and support they need to move forward. Croatia, as a member state of the European Union for a little bit more than a decade, understands very well the importance of further enlargement to all countries that share our values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And there is no doubt that the European path is the right development path for economic prosperity, for democratization, functioning of the rule of law, and generally for a better life of the people. About stability of our European continent, it's been said a lot. And we are really very glad that there has been understanding now within the EU that we should somehow strengthen the process and make it more efficient. With regard to Western Balkan 6, the process has gained a new momentum, especially with the decision of the candidate status of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as decision of starting the accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. They also need to move forward on the path. Last week, the European Commission issued a positive report on Bosnia and Herzegovina, recommending the European Council to open the negotiations with that country, emphasizing the substantial progress that country has done in a very short period of time. In line with this positive report and in accordance with the European Council decision of December, Croatia really expects the European Council to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina this week, and to invite the Commission to prepare the negotiating framework for this country. It will also be a strong encouragement to the pro-European political forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina, proving that reforms are worth the effort and bring results. Equally, this would encourage other Western Balkan partners, as well as TRIO, into their endeavors to move forward on the European path and enlargement process. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Metelko-Zgorbic. We have now heard the views of 12 of our member states. I would now like to give the floor to the representatives of the political groups for 2 minutes each. We begin with the EPP, and it's Michael Gahler.
Yes, thank you very much, and very warm welcome to all of you who made it here, and may at the same time express my sincere regret that my own member state, the largest one, did not make it here, although they have, apart from the minister, they have 3 state ministers and 3 state secretaries in the Foreign Office and still didn't bother. So I hope this will, in some way, this criticism be communicated to them. I think what we have seen, and I'm very glad about that, a large sense of convergence with regard to the enlargement process, which is indeed and has become a geostrategic issue given the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which is, as we all know, directed formally against Ukraine currently, but it is about us, our way of life, our organization of society. So the threat is against all of us, and we have to respond to that. And I think the enlargement is indeed a good recipe and a good means to address it. Merit-based is right, but we should embrace all countries, but embracing also means pushing and pressing at the same time. So there should be no compromises where we see obvious deficits. And in this regard, I'm very much in favor of the broad approach that has been taken here by the colleagues, and I will hope that in the European Council decisions that will also be duly reflected then. When it comes to the minority issues, I'm also the standing rapporteur on Ukraine, and I have followed it over the years, where they made mistakes in the past and where they have corrected the mistakes. That should also be positively considered. If I look at the standards, and we don't have an acquis on minority rights in the EU, but we have standards that we see, and I think in this regard, when I see the practice in Ukraine, they are on the better half already. So I ask Hungary to really assess this and not instrumentalize this issue.
Thank you. Michael Gahler, for the S&D, Tonino Pizzula, please.
Thank you, Chair. Esteemed guests, welcome to the House on behalf of Socialist and Democrat as well. We are all aware that we need to make a final boost concerning enlargement before the European elections. I welcome positive news from the Commission concerning Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I also believe other issues cannot be put aside. European Parliament has always been a supporter for enlargement, and I do hope this support will continue in the next mandate. However, we as the European Parliament also stressed consistent message, and we believe that enlargement can go hand in hand with internal EU reforms. I welcome the decision to extend the enlargement policy to the countries of the Eastern Partnership 2 years ago. It was a true history, but since then, waiting room before European Union door becomes overcrowded. All in all, 10 countries are in process now. It's necessary to start emptying waiting room in near future. Needless to say, building bridges, tunnels and highways funded by the EU money is welcomed, but respect for fundamental values must be a precondition for that. European Union is not only a common market, but a union of values and community of shared risks too. Due to its complex structure and geopolitical location, European Union is extremely sensitive to events and processes, both in its immediate neighborhood and to changes in the global character, like no other relevant geopolitical factor. That's the main reason why renewed enlargement policy matters and must be more anchored in any given vision how to upgrade European project. Thank you.
Thank you, Tonino. Next for Renew, Petros Austrevicius.
Thank you, David, and good morning to everybody who is joining the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. It's a good demonstration of our partnership as it must remain in years to come. Indeed, nobody questions that the EU enlargement become more geostrategic. I mean, we never mentioned so many times geostrategic principle as for the time of being, and it's rightly so. We have to recognize, I mean, next decade will be in EU enlargement, much busier. And we have to recognize it in full scale, putting it on the high of the agenda. But again, as the Foreign Affairs Committee and AFCO, Constitutional Affairs Committee, mentioned in its joint report on February 29th this year, the Parliament approved it in a good support of members voting. So we put reforms and enlargement hand in hand, in parallel, not as a precondition. So that's why I raised certain concern hearing the Commission's report as, pre-enlargement reforms and so on and so forth. I think we are able, and we have to be capable, making reforms at the same time as going on enlargement negotiations with those countries. And of course, basic principles remain. Merits-based differentiation, regatta, and so on and so forth. But, as it was mentioned by my colleagues, look, rule of law and affiliation with the common and foreign security policy remains basic principles. Increasing in value, not decreasing in value. So that's why it must be mentioned in the Western Balkans growth and reforms package, no doubt. Otherwise, we will face different considerations of Eastern Europe and Western Balkans. And finally, Ministers, once you meet in Brussels, yesterday I missed a lot in the statement of Joseph Borrell about the outcome of the Russian selection process. All right? It was about everything but about nothing. Make the clear statement, non-recognition of the elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Petras. No request to take the floor from the Greens. Mr. Alfonsi, yes? You want to take the floor? Okay, then the floor is yours.
Comme j'étais seul, j'ai pensé que...
I thought that was self-evident. I'd like to draw your attention to a key problem when it comes to enlargement. It's a political agenda at the end of the day. Today, we've seen Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we're asking the candidate countries to make an effort to ensure convergence. But I believe that Europe itself also needs to consider its policies when it comes to the Balkans and Ukraine. The right of minorities, respect for linguistic diversity. Unfortunately, we've seen backsliding in Europe over the last 30 years, and yet this is something enshrined in the Copenhagen criteria. It must be championed when it comes to the agenda on candidate countries. I believe that the Parliament has an opportunity to improve European policy on minority languages. Our Parliament voted overwhelmingly in support, but we've not seen follow-up, unfortunately. The enlargement process will only succeed if the minority issue is properly taken into account, if we show respect for the culture and language of minorities in these regions.
Merci, cher collègue. No request to take the floor from the ECR group, so I hand over to the ID group's representative, Jean-Lynne Lacapelle.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames et Messieurs.
Thank you very much. Ministers, I listened to your speeches, and I'd like to thank you. I'd like to remind you that the European Council for International Relations in November 2023 published a survey or an opinion poll of what citizens think of enlargement. 37% are against, and there is no absolute majority. There is no absolute majority in any of the candidate countries, and the EU already has 27 member states. We've already said that we're already too many, and the enlargement process progressed too quickly. 44% of French people are in favor of the principle of enlargement, so rather against it. And we have to respect what the peoples of Europe want. And there's the whole issue of getting rid of unanimity when it comes to enlargement. This is very disdainful towards European peoples. This is a pie in the sky, and you are disregarding the social views of our people. It's going to destroy our culture with, of course, Ukraine joining, then Albania, a country of mafiosos, and then, of course, the issue of Kosovo, and the crazy project that you referred to, and that is still topical, and that is the accession of Turkey. You could have decided to focus on protecting European peoples, and if you had succeeded, then you would have honored your promises to the European people, and then people wouldn't be so suspicious and mistrustful of the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Løkke. Thank you, Mr. Løkke. If I just followed the interpretation correctly, you just called one of our candidate countries, Albania, as a mafia state. This is not the language we use in the European Parliament. I want to be very clear here. Colleagues, because there is no request to take the floor from the left and the ECR, I can give the following speakers 1 minute, and then everyone can be covered. But then we need to close, so it's 1 minute each. We begin with Ms. Bokshaw for the non-inscrit.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, honourable ministers, for coming and being with us today, and also for your interventions. And my MEP colleagues are fully aware of my commitment to the topic of enlargement, since you know, I was born as a Hungarian, but in Ukraine, in the most western part of Ukraine. So it was very much disappointing to hear that some ministers think that the issue of minority protection is just an artificial problem or a blackmail. Because I do think that protection of minority rights and non-discrimination of citizens is a fundamental European value. And it should not be swept under the carpet in any case. So the minorities, you know, live the same life as the majority population. They also suffer from the war. And because of it, they deserve the same rights, equal rights as the majority population. So the accession process should be a merit-based and in line with the conditions of the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bokshaw. For the EPP, Jana Zovko, 1 minute.
Right, thank you very much. I would just refer to what you have all said, and listening from the east to the south, enlargement process is taken as a strategic geopolitical tool for the security of European citizens. Also, Monsieur Jean Lacapelle, you should understand that as a former soldier, there's no country on the border of European Union that will, instead of France, look after the security of European citizens. But we have Ukraine, who has chosen to become European member country, and they're fighting for it. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a key country for Western Balkan. We have to open negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. If we are going deep into the questions, even member countries would never satisfy the criteria. And I think facility growth mechanism has to be adopted, otherwise IPA 3 doesn't function. So all this rubbish about conditionality and thing is meaning that people will not have jobs, young people will not stay in Western Balkan, and we are going to talk to ourselves in the future. So you should open accession negotiations as a strategic mechanism that European Union has. It's the only one and the last one that we have as somebody who cannot coordinate ourselves. And the shame on France and Germany not to be here and not to understand how important this is.
Thank you. Next is Thijs Ruijten, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, thank you for being here, and big thank you to Mr. Landsbergis for taking this initiative. And I was also 100% aligned with your comments. That was excellent. Pleased to see that the past year's enlargement has gained new momentum. It is after supporting Ukraine to win sending all the weapons they need, the single best thing you or we can do for these countries, but also for ourselves. But what I miss compared to the era after the fall of the Berlin Wall is the real political willingness, persuasion, the commitment to make this a success, to say to these countries, okay, whatever time it takes, we're gonna do it, and we're gonna support you throughout. Instead, we hear too much, summit after summit, genuine commitment, full commitment to the European path. That has to stop. Explain to citizens why this is important, and two, also critically assess each other in the Council. There are member states who are doing everything to derail the process. And I think cementing in problems for national political reasons is in fact happening at this moment. So may I count on you to not do that again, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Next is Dacian Ciolos.
Thank you, Chair. Je vois que Monsieur Lacapelle a jeté ses paroles dans l'air et
It's a pity that Mr. Lachapelle has left, having said what he did, and not seeming to care about it, and talking about the opinions of the European citizens in this way. That's how extremists see Europe.
Integrated the European Union some years ago, I can say that this is a real peace project, and all previous enlargement reinforced the European Union, and I am sure that it can be done with new member states. But I think what is important is to start as soon as possible negotiations of accessions with Ukraine, Moldova, and others who are ready, and not to see this process as a bureaucratic one, but really help these countries to do reforms and, on the meantime, to progressively integrate European policies. And as a former Commissioner for Agriculture and someone who was involved in the negotiations of accessions in Romania, I can tell you that there are solutions also for the elephant in the room, agriculture and Ukraine, to reinforce competitiveness of European Union and not to weaken them, and both of European Union and Ukraine. But let's start this process as soon as possible and not only talk, but do concrete things.
Thank you, Dacian. Andreas Gabrielius, 1 minute.
Well, thanks a lot, Chair. Absolutely clear that there is no need to convince anybody here in this room, how important is enlargement. But besides those words, we need to look into very practical issues. And first of all, how to move negotiations from, let's say, Western Balkan style up to that level which we have had when negotiations were going with us, with Central Europe. And that is where I would urge ministers and prime ministers to support German and Slovenian proposal put into negotiation framework, some ideas how to diminish possibilities of vetoing, different opening of chapters or closing of chapters, because that is opening the possibility for 70 new vetoes. So we need to move into qualified majority, at least partly into negotiation process. Second, I absolutely agree with Mr. Ciolos. For us, especially in Central Europe, we need to convince our voters, our farmers, not to be afraid of competition, which is coming with enlargement. That's the last point. In my view, minority needs to have a possibility to learn the official state language. Denial of such a possibility is violation of human rights of minorities.
Thank you. And to conclude, Ms. Alexandrov Yordanov, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Enlargement is a process. We usually say that this is a successful process for the EU. However, we need to ask ourselves why it is successful. There is only one answer, because the decisions made in this regard were unanimous. They've always been unanimous so far. Any other attempt to change the decision-making system as far as enlargement is concerned would lead to conflicts and skirmishes within the EU. Currently, we do not need any such problems, or arguments, or skirmishes. I need to highlight what was mentioned here. Our committee should put forward a proposal to the European Council, i.e. not to recognize the elections in Russia. They should not be recognized as legitimate. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speakers of the groups and further colleagues for their contributions. And now to conclude, I would like to give the floor back to the representative of the ministers. And I guess because, Gabrielius, you initiated this, I think it's best that you take the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. Dear colleagues, indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here and listen to. Nobody's saying that the rights of minorities should be overlooked. What we're trying to say is that the accession and enlargement process cannot be a moving target. If we set out on a path, we have to walk it, not try to avoid it. And therefore, it is imperative that at this juncture, we set the date when the negotiations can start. And this is the biggest challenge, is because it has to be set in 2 days. So therefore, it is very good that we had this conversation, but it also would be very good that the Parliament reacts how the Council behaves in 2 days. If we don't set the date now, it most likely it won't be set then by June. If it's not set by June, then, well, I have particular doubts whether it would be set for next half a year. And then we're talking 2025. Therefore, it's imperative that we set the date in 2 days, that we actually fix it. And then we'll solve all the problems that are there on the table. So once again, I'm truly grateful for this opportunity to let us speak and let us address this House. And I'm still hopeful that we will have the most meaningful decisions made already this week. Well, thank you once again, Chair.
Thank you, Gabrielius. Now, I know that you all have to rush to the next meeting. Some of our ministers have already left, but I see there's one more request to take the floor, the State Secretary from Hungary.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this is a very useful exchange of views about enlargement. It's clear that we have some differences on the geopolitical importance of one of the other region, but it doesn't mean that we cannot find common solutions on enlargement. And that's why we have to avoid words like instrumentalizing or blackmail, because that doesn't help consensus building. And we have been advocating for geopolitical approach for 20 years with regard to the Western Balkans, but not too many listen to us, actually. Now everybody speaks about geopolitics with regard to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, which I welcome. But then let's keep the balance of the different directions, strategic directions of enlargement. And on the QMV issue, I don't think that introducing more QMV would help more unity among the member states. We need to find consensus first, and then we can proceed with the enlargement process, which is dear and important to all of us. So let's work on that. Let's avoid characterizing each other with very negative words, and then we will find a good approach on the enlargement. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I don't see any further requests to take the floor. Colleagues, let me thank you for this very interesting and useful exchange of views. Let me thank the ministers and the state secretaries who attended this meeting. And I now would ask you, under any other business, if somebody would like to take the floor. Certainly not. The dates of our next meeting will be the 20th and the 21st of March. Thank you very much. This meeting is now closed.